They took my room, my bed, my peace. But they forgot one thing. This house remembers who built it. My name is Grace Ellison. I built the house they called home, until the day they forgot who built it. The first time I saw the empty lot on Alder Lane, the ground was nothing but frost and wild weeds. The realtor had called it a fixer's dream, which was just another way of saying nobody else wanted it. But standing there in my thick winter coat, my boots sinking into the frozen dirt, I saw something that didn't exist yet, a porch swing creaking softly in the breeze, the sound of laughter spilling from a kitchen window, a place that might one day remember my name. I was 54 then, newly widowed and hollowed out by quiet. My husband, Henry, had been gone for a year, his tools still hanging neatly in the shed, his coffee mug still on the counter, the handle worn smooth by decades of mornings. People said time healed. They were wrong. Time only teaches you how to walk while carrying the wound. But before he died, Henry made me promise one thing. "Build something that lasts, Grace," he'd said, his voice thin from the sickness that took him. Something for Caleb, something that'll outlive both of us. So I did. Every paycheck from the library, every freelance editing gig I could scrape together, every quiet evening I spent balancing bills under the yellow kitchen light, it all went toward that promise. My coworkers thought I was foolish, spending my savings on a house instead of starting fresh. But I wasn't chasing a new beginning. I was trying to finish what love had started. When the frame went up, I visited every day after work. The smell of sawdust became my favorite perfume. I'd bring sandwiches for the builders, take photos of every milestone, and keep a small notebook where I wrote things like "Today the windows went in," or "The light hits the east wall just right in the morning." By the time I turned 60, it stood there proud and complete, a pale yellow 2-story home with white trim, a wraparound porch and a little attic window that caught the sunrise. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. And in some quiet way, it was Henry's too. When Caleb came home for graduation, I handed him a small key wrapped in blue ribbon. "This is your home too," I told him, smiling like it didn't hurt to say it. He hugged me so tight I could feel his heart beating against mine. "Mom, you're incredible. One day, when I get married, we'll fill this place with family again." I remember thinking, that's all I ever wanted. Caleb had always been a good soul, kind, gentle, too trusting sometimes. He was an architect, just starting to find his footing in the world. When he introduced me to Tessa a few years later, I thought she was a blessing. She was everything I wasn't. Poised, confident, a woman who spoke as if the world listened. She wore perfume that smelled faintly of roses and ambition. Her hair was always perfect, her laughter precise and effortless. When she first visited the house, she walked through each room with wide eyes, saying how much she loved the charm of it all. She called me Mom from the start. She brought me gifts for the kitchen, helped me set the table, told me stories about her job at the marketing firm in Burlington. I wanted so badly to believe she saw me as family, not just a stepping stone. When they got engaged, I redecorated the master bedroom for them. Painted it a warm cream, bought new curtains, added a quilt I'd sewn myself. I even left a note on the dresser. "May your love be the heart of this home." They moved in after the wedding, and for a while it felt like the house had come alive again. Caleb would whistle in the mornings like Henry used to, and Tessa filled the kitchen with the scent of cinnamon and coffee. We had Sunday dinners, long talks about their plans, laughter that drifted down the hallways, but warmth, I've learned, doesn't vanish all at once. It fades quietly. It started with little things. The floral curtains I'd hung in the living room disappeared one day, replaced by sleek gray blinds. The framed photo of Henry and me that sat on the mantel was tucked away into a drawer. Tessa said she was modernizing the space. I smiled and said it looked lovely, even though every change felt like someone was quietly erasing me. Then came the subtle jabs. "You're such a creature of habit, Grace," she'd say, laughing. Or, "You're lucky we moved in when we did. The place needed a touch of youth." Caleb would just smile, trying to keep the peace. He never liked conflict. One rainy night, I fell asleep knitting on the couch. When I woke, I could hear Tessa talking on the phone in the kitchen, her voice low and sharp. "She's still here," she said. "It's like living with a ghost that won't move on." Something inside me cracked, but I stayed quiet. The next morning, I found boxes stacked in the hallway. Designer shoes, handbags, coats. My room looked different. My dresser was gone, my bed pushed aside. "Tessa?" I called softly. She appeared in the doorway, smiling. "Oh, Grace, I meant to tell you. We're using your room for storage. You can stay in the guest room." The guest room was half finished. No bed, just a folded blanket on the floor. "Where's my bed?" I asked. "We'll move it in later," she said breezily. That night, the rain came harder. I lay on the wooden floor with the blanket pulled up to my chin. My back ached, my knees throbbed. But the worst pain came from hearing their laughter behind the closed door of what used to be my room. Every creak in the floorboards sounded like the house was apologizing to me. In the morning, Tessa offered me coffee like nothing had happened. Caleb avoided looking at me. I wanted to ask him how he could let her do this. But I'd learned that silence can speak louder than confrontation. Days turned into weeks. My presence became an inconvenience. Tessa criticized the way I cooked, the way I folded laundry, even the way I breathed too loudly when I read. She called it setting boundaries. Caleb worked longer hours. He came home tired, distracted. When we did speak, he looked through me, not at me. One evening, I found the family photo box sitting by the trash bin outside. All our memories, wedding pictures, birthdays, holidays, thrown out like clutter. I carried it back to my room and sat with it for hours, tracing my fingers over the edges of every photograph. That was the night I decided I was done begging for space in a home I built. 2 days later, I packed my few remaining things. Some clothes, the photo box, Henry's old tool set, and a small leather folder I hadn't touched in years, the property deed. I had planned to transfer it to Caleb after the wedding, but something always stopped me. Maybe intuition, maybe grace. When Caleb came home that evening, I was waiting by the door. "Mom?" he said, confused. "What's going on?" "I'm leaving," I told him gently. He frowned. "You don't have to." "I do." I looked around the house one last time. This place forgot who built it. Tessa appeared behind him, her lips pressed in that polite smile she wore when pretending to care. "Grace, don't be dramatic. We can work something out." "No," I said. "You already did." And I walked out. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes. The air was cool and clean. I didn't look back, because some goodbyes lose their meaning the moment you do. I rented a small apartment above a bakery near the lake. It was old, drafty, and smelled faintly of cinnamon and yeast. I found work part-time at the library again, and in the evenings I joined a local reading circle. For the first time in years, my laughter wasn't filtered through someone else's expectations. People there called me Miss Grace. They didn't know what I'd lost. Only that I smiled easily and brought cookies every Thursday. And slowly, quietly, I began to feel alive again. But peace, it seems, is the soil where truth eventually blooms. Months passed before I heard from Caleb again. I thought of calling him many times, but something stopped me each time. Maybe pride, maybe the lingering ache of betrayal. I followed his life the way people follow the weather, from a distance, expecting storms but hoping for sun. Then one afternoon, while shelving books at the library, I saw him outside through the window. He looked thinner, pale, with dark circles under his eyes. When I stepped out, he smiled, but it was a tired kind of smile. "Hi, Mom." It had been almost 6 months since I'd heard that word from him. We went for coffee at the cafe next door. He told me about his new job, about the late nights, about Tessa's social events and how she'd really made the house her own. "That's good," I said softly. "I hope you're both happy." He stirred his coffee but didn't drink it. "She's ambitious." He said it like a confession. "Sometimes it feels like the house belongs to her more than to me." I smiled faintly. "Maybe it does. She's certainly worked to make it that way. He looked up then, eyes searching mine. You sound different. I am, I said. He didn't ask how. Maybe he didn't want to know. After that, our conversations came more often. Short calls, a few texts. He came to visit once, brought me flowers and a box of muffins. He looked around my little apartment and said, "It's cozy." "It's mine," I replied, and that made him smile. It was spring when the first letter came. It was addressed to homeowner, 215 Alder Lane, my old address, but forwarded to me because the property record still had my name. I opened it absent-mindedly over breakfast. It was a property tax notice, red-stamped, past due, immediate attention required. For a moment, I thought there must be a mistake. Then I remembered. I'd never transferred the deed to Caleb. The house was still legally mine. I folded the letter neatly, slipped it into a drawer, and went about my day. A week later, another arrived. This one more urgent. I began to understand what fate had done. It hadn't punished me. It had given me a choice. I didn't rush into anything. I waited. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud, it's patient. It watches. It lets the guilty write their own downfall. In early May, Caleb called me again. His voice was tight. "Mom, did you get any mail for the house?" "Just a couple of notices," I said lightly. "About the taxes?" "Yes," he sighed. "Tessa thought you'd transferred everything already. We didn't realize the bills were still under your name. See? She said it's probably a clerical mix-up." I could hear the uncertainty in his voice, the same tone he used when he was a boy, caught between telling the truth and keeping the peace. "It's not a mix-up, Caleb," I said gently. "I never transferred the deed." Silence, then faintly, "You didn't?" "No, I was going to, but I suppose—" Something stopped me. He exhaled slowly. "Tessa's going to lose her mind." "I imagined she might," I said. That evening, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Caleb. "Grace." Tessa's voice snapped through the line, sharp as a blade. "What's this about you still owning the house?" "I'm not sure what you mean," I said calmly. "Don't play dumb." The tax office called. "They said your name is still on the title." "You told Caleb the house was ours." "No," I said. "I told him it was his home." "There's a difference." She went quiet. I could almost hear the panic behind her composure. "You can't just take it back," she said finally, her voice trembling with outrage. "I'm not taking anything," I replied softly. "I'm keeping what was mine." "You're cruel," she hissed. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "No, Tessa. Cruelty is making someone sleep on the floor in the house they built." I hung up before she could answer. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of guilt, but because of clarity. Some truths glow too brightly to ignore. The next morning, I went to the town office and spoke with a clerk named Margaret, a woman with kind eyes and a quiet understanding. I explained that I still held ownership and wanted to reclaim full possession due to unpaid taxes and property misuse. She nodded slowly, slid a stack of papers toward me and said, "You're well within your rights, Mrs. Ellison." By the end of that week, a formal notice of repossession had been mailed to the house. Caleb called again, this time almost in tears. "Mom, please don't do this." "Tessa didn't mean for things to go that far. We'll pay the taxes, I promise." "I'm not doing this to hurt you," I said. "I'm doing it because I finally remember who I am." "But where will we go?" "There's a guest house behind the property," I reminded him. "It's small, but it's shelter." He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Tessa will never agree to that." "She doesn't need to," I said. The legal process took nearly 2 months. During that time, I stayed silent. Let them stew. Let them feel the edges of what I'd once endured. Word spread around town as gossip always does. People whispered about the poor young couple being evicted by the mother. But those who knew the truth, the old neighbors, the builders who'd watched me hammer nails into that porch with Henry's tools, they nodded when they saw me at the market. They understood. On a humid afternoon in July, I went back to Alder Lane for the first time in nearly a year. The hydrangeas I'd planted by the porch were blooming, wild, and overgrown. The shutters had lost their shine, and the mailbox leaned slightly to one side. Caleb stood outside when I arrived. He looked older somehow, worn down by the kind of regret that doesn't fade easily. Tessa was beside him, arms crossed, face pale. She didn't speak. "Mom," Caleb said softly. "Grace," Tessa corrected him under her breath. I ignored her. "The papers went through this morning," I told him. "I own the property again," he nodded. "I figured. You can stay in the guest house for now," I said, keeping my tone gentle. "It's small, but it's dry." "There's a mattress and an old heater in the closet." Tessa's eyes widened in disbelief. "You expect us to live out there?" I met her gaze. "It's better than the floor, isn't it?" For a moment, nobody spoke. The air was thick with the kind of silence that holds a lifetime of lessons. Caleb finally looked at me. Really looked, the way he used to. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said. "I know," I whispered. Tessa turned away, tears glinting in her eyes, though pride kept them from falling. I moved back into the house that week. It felt strange at first, too quiet, too empty, but as I unpacked my things, it began to breathe again. I found my old quilt, my photo frames, my books. I made tea in the chipped mug Henry had used every morning. The house remembered me. A few days later, I saw Tessa out by the garden, trying to hang laundry on the line behind the guest house. Her hands shook. She wasn't used to work like that. I watched from the porch, not out of cruelty but out of quiet observation. Life was teaching her what I no longer needed to say. Caleb began spending his evenings fixing small things around the property, tightening hinges, repainting the porch rail, mending the fence. He didn't have to, but I let him. Some kinds of remorse need to take shape in work. One afternoon, he came inside, his shirt streaked with paint. "You were right," he said simply. "About what?" "About her. About the house. About everything." I shook my head. "No, Caleb. You had to learn it for yourself." Tessa avoided me for weeks. Then one evening, she knocked softly on the kitchen door. Her eyes were red, her voice small. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. "But I want you to know, I see what I did now. I thought strength meant control. I thought love meant owning everything around me. But it doesn't. I was wrong." I studied her for a moment. The girl who once looked untouchable now seemed human, fragile even. "Pride can turn people cruel," I said quietly. "But it can also make them change." She nodded. "I'm sorry, Grace." "I know," I said. "That's enough." When she left, I looked around the house, at the afternoon light slanting through the windows, dust motes drifting in gold. It no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like peace returning home. The next morning, I found a small note tucked into the porch railing. It was from Tessa. "Thank you for reminding me what home really means." I didn't cry, but something soft inside me loosened. Sometimes, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means you stop letting the wound define you. Summer faded slowly that year. The days stretched long and golden, the air heavy with the scent of cut grass and rain-soaked soil. I spent most mornings on the porch with my coffee, watching the light change across the yard. The boards beneath, my feet creaked the same way they always had, a sound that once broke my heart and now soothed it. Caleb and Tessa stayed in the guest house longer than anyone expected. I didn't ask them to leave. They seemed gentler now, humbled in a way that made silence between us less painful. Sometimes I caught glimpses of them walking down to the mailbox together or sitting under the oak tree. Their heads bent close as they spoke quietly. There was no laughter, but there was calm. One evening, Caleb knocked on my door. He was holding a set of keys, the ones I'd left on the kitchen counter when I moved out months ago. "You should have these," he said. I took them, feeling their familiar weight in my palm. "Thank you." He hesitated. "We're thinking of moving to the next town over. Tessa's cousin has an apartment. Small, but affordable." "That sounds good," I said. "I just wanted to tell you before we go. and to say—" He paused, searching for words that didn't come easily. "You were right about what matters. I got so lost trying to prove myself that I forgot who taught me to build things in the first place." I smiled faintly. "It's never too late to remember." He nodded. His eyes were the same soft gray they'd been when he was a boy, when he'd hand me wildflowers and say, "These are for you, Mom." For the first time in a long time, I saw that child again. Tessa came by a few days later. She had a box of kitchenware in her arms, mugs, some plates, a jar of honey. "These were yours," she said. "I kept meaning to give them back." I took them gently. "Thank you." She looked around the living room, her eyes tracing the walls, the photos, the faint marks on the doorframe where Caleb's height was once measured every year. "It's strange," she murmured. "I used to think this house belonged to me just because I lived in it. But now I see it belonged to whoever loved it most." I said nothing. Sometimes silence says everything. She turned to leave, then stopped. "Grace, I hope you find peace here." "I already have," I said. After they left, the house was quiet again. Not the hollow quiet of loss, but the steady quiet of peace settling in its rightful place. I opened the windows, let the wind move through the rooms, and felt the walls breathe with me. The next morning, I started painting. The kitchen first. Soft cream on the cabinets, pale sage on the walls. The act of painting felt like forgiveness in motion, each brushstroke a way of claiming the space again without anger. By the time I finished, the house looked brighter, lighter. It was as though it had shed someone else's shadow. A few neighbors stopped by to see me over the next week. Mr. Lawson from 2 doors down brought over a basket of peaches. "Heard you're back for good," he said. "I think I am," I replied. "Well," he said with a grin, "Alder Lane feels right again. Never did sit well seeing strangers in this place." I laughed softly. "It wasn't their fault entirely." He raised an eyebrow. "Maybe not, but a house remembers who built it." That night, I sat on the porch as the sun went down. The world around me dipped in gold. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass, and the sound of crickets filled the air. I thought about Henry, the way he'd always said the heart of a home isn't the walls, it's the promise you make inside them. I'd broken that promise once, letting bitterness drive me out. But now, with the sky fading to violet and the first stars appearing, I felt the promise again. It wasn't about owning the land. It was about belonging to it, honestly, finally. A few weeks later, Caleb called. "We're settled," he said. "It's small, but it's ours this time." I smiled. "That's all that matters." "I was thinking," he continued, "maybe we could visit you sometime." "For dinner." "Of course," I said. "You know you're always welcome." When I hung up, I realized that forgiveness isn't about letting someone back in. It's about letting yourself stop standing guard. Autumn arrived quietly, the kind that paints the trees in copper and gold. I raked leaves one afternoon, humming to myself, when I noticed a familiar car pull up the drive. It wasn't Caleb's. It was the realtor I'd met years ago when we first bought the house. "Grace," she said, stepping out. "I heard you reclaimed the place." "I just wanted to say, I'm glad. This house has good bones. It's always belonged to you." I smiled. "It feels that way." She handed me her card. "If you ever want to sell, I could get you an excellent offer. People love stories like this, homes that come full circle." I took the card, but I knew I wouldn't need it. Some stories aren't meant to be sold. That evening, I baked a pie with the peaches Mr. Lawson had given me. I brought him a slice, left it on his porch with a note that said simply, "For kindness that never asked for return." Then I went back home, cut a slice for myself, and sat by the window watching the wind scatter the leaves across the yard. I thought about how easily love turns to sacrifice, and sacrifice to silence, and silence to forgetting. But then, sometimes, life gives you a second chance to rebuild what you lost, not by going back, but by standing still long enough for the past to find peace in you. As night fell, I turned off the lights and walked through each room. My footsteps echoed softly against the wood floors. I stopped in front of the mirror near the stairs, the same one where I used to adjust my hair before leaving for work. The woman who looked back at me was older now, lines around her eyes, silver threading through her hair. But her eyes were clear. I whispered to her reflection, "You did it. You came home." The air felt warm and still. I could almost hear Henry's voice in the quiet, steady, gentle. "You always were stronger than you thought." Outside, the porch light flickered as moths danced around it. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked. Life went on, soft and ordinary, exactly how I wanted it. Weeks passed, and one morning, I woke to the sound of knocking. When I opened the door, Caleb stood there with Tessa beside him. She held a small plant in her hands, a young lavender bush wrapped in brown paper. "For the garden," she said, "to start over." I took it carefully. "Thank you." They stayed for dinner that night. We ate simple food, chicken stew, fresh bread, slices of pie. The laughter came easy this time, not loud, but real. When they left, I planted the lavender in the soil beneath the kitchen window, where the morning sun always fell first. As I covered the roots with dirt, I felt something settle inside me, a quiet completion. I didn't need vengeance. I didn't need victory. I had something better. The life that was meant to be mine, reclaimed without cruelty, restored without apology. That night, I sat on the porch again, watching the moon rise over the oak trees. The house was still, but alive. I thought of everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. How sometimes revenge isn't about watching someone fall. It's about learning how to stand. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying the faint scent of lavender. Somewhere in the distance, a door closed, a car engine started, and the world went on turning. I smiled to myself, a soft, private smile that belonged to no one else. After everything, after all the years of giving and losing and waiting, I finally understood. You can't make people see your worth. You can only stop giving it away, and for the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone to agree. Every story leaves a scar, and every scar has a story. Subscribe, and don't miss the next one.